Hello, hello. Welcome back to Loki's Library. And if you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina. And on once a week, I review a book while mixing up a cocktail. I call it Books and Booze. This month, we are looking at books on resilience, making this week's book, The Obstacle is the Way, The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumphs by Ryan Holiday. Now, usually I do mix up a cocktail with these reviews. However, you may have noticed from my background that I am not at home this week. Again, I am traveling for the day job, which has me in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, where it is approximately 142 million degrees outside. And when you are standing on the surface of the sun, alcohol is just going to dehydrate you faster. So I'm not doing a cocktail today. Today I'm just drinking plain ice cold water to, keep myself from exploding in a ball of desiccated dust because it is that hot outside. I don't do heat well. There's a reason I wanted to move to New Hampshire where it's 68 degrees in the middle of July, and God bless it. But yeah, not doing a cocktail in this heat. Ryan Holiday has written extensively on Stoicism. I mean, he's written other things too, but Stoicism, Stoic philosophy, that's his primary milieu. Now, my first introduction to Stoicism was through Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. And once I read that, I Googled Stoicism, and this led to the Daily Stoic website, which I'm pretty sure is Holiday's website, because this is what pointed me towards his books, including this week's book. Holiday breaks down the keys to Stoicism and resilience into three parts: perception, action, and will. And each of these parts are further broken down to explain these kind of overarching themes. So perception is described as a discipline, which it is. It's, quote, how we see and understand what occurs around us and what we decide those events will mean. Now, if you respond to everything like it's an emotional catastrophe, life quickly becomes a never-ending tragedy of sorrow and misfortune. But if you restrain yourself, limit your reactions and passions, as Holiday calls it, then you limit their control over your life. This allows you to take control of your own life. And with that simple step, you become the architect of your own fate rather than being jerked around by the whims and follies of the fates, if you will. And it truly is that simple, which is not to say it's easy, because nothing ever worth accomplishing is easy. But it is simple. Control your emotions. And in an age that we are taught or even encouraged to have a public meltdown and share it with the world via social media, controlling our emotions is not second nature to most people. In fact, it's a bit of a struggle to really get the hang of it. And I've practiced Stoicism even before I really knew what it was, but even I have fallen whim to this, all right? And I'm not going to lie, it doesn't help that I read, Reddit stories and stuff like that, where, again, everybody's encouraged to react and be over the top, and I'm going, oh, well, how would I react? Well, I'd probably react by being a complete jackass. So learning to pull that back and take control of myself, it's a challenge. It's not easy, but it is really that simple. So how do you get to a point where you're able to control your emotions and responses? Well, I mean, how does the old song go? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Right? You have to practice that. It's not easy. It's not something that comes second nature to both people. And Holiday provides just loads of anecdotes which illustrate his point, because this isn't something that can be empirically done. It's not a scientific study per se. But there is a ton of anecdotal evidence from people who are known to have read Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, other Stoics, Seneca, etc., and learn to focus on how things really are, right? Shift your perception from this is how this made me feel, to how can I learn from this to my advantage. So the first example he leads off with in the book is oil baron John D. Rockefeller. Now, people like to decry Rockefeller as a robber baron, right? Oh, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he just took over, and nobody was ever able to do anything with oil ever again because he stole the market. Well, no. So Rockefeller literally came from nothing. He did not have a silver spoon in his mouth. His father was a criminal who abandoned the family so that Rockefeller started work at 16, right before the financial panic of 1857. There's a reason it's called a financial panic, right? But rather than panicking like everybody else, Rockefeller, who had learned to master his emotions by this point, stayed calm, cool, and collected and did the opposite of what everyone who was panicking was doing. And this ultimately led to him controlling 90% of the oil market. By remaining unflappable, by staying in the market when greedy competitors crashed and burned or nervous colleagues sold out, doubters missed out, he became an absolute legend. And I mean, for this, of course, history decries him as a robber baron. I mean, you're not going to win friends by remaining calm, but you will be master of your own fate. So which is more important to you? To have a large circle of friends who will in fact tear you down any chance they get, because very few people actually know what it is to be a friend, not just to have a friend, but to be a friend, or controlling your own destiny. What do you prefer? What's more important to you? Watertight. Steady your nerves, control your emotions, learn to pivot when reality dictates. And he points to the NASA space training program and how they train astronauts not to panic by practicing every possible scenario. A couple years ago, the movie Hidden Figures came out, and it shows the first, the first man that the United States launched into space with Glenn, who orbited the planet, which was John Glenn, right? And he orbited the Earth on February 20th, 1962, and his heat shield started reading as loose. They had a sensor, and they didn't know if it was just the sensor that was on the fritz or the actual heat shield. By doing the wrong thing, and panic will absolutely lead you to do the wrong thing, he would have burned up in the atmosphere. But instead, he stayed very cool, very calm. His heart rate remained under 100 beats per minute during this incredibly intense, potentially fatal moment in time. By controlling his emotions, by not panicking, he managed a safe re-entry. And that was all portrayed in the movie fairly accurately. And the movie condensed a bunch of other things, and we'll come back to that next month, because I think I'm actually reading the book Hidden Figures next month. But John Glenn, complete boss move, completely calm, and they trained for that. They practiced every possible scenario. Practice, maintain control of your emotions. The section on perception contains subsections on discipline, recognizing your power, steadying your nerves, controlling your emotions, practice objectivity, alter your perspective. Is it up to you? All right, some things actually are going to be beyond your control. Live in the present moment, think differently, find opportunities, and prepare to act. And each of these subsections includes stories from history of these guidelines in action. Now, to give you an idea of how you might incorporate these ideas into your life, or ideals into your life, I should say. Because in the 21st century, you have almost certainly not been challenged in the same ways that our forebears have been, which is not to say you haven't been challenged. All right, I'm not trying to decry that there are still horrible things out there that are challenging. Your challenges are going to be different, and here's how you might overcome that. Part 2 is action, right? Man, called back to the book I read a couple years ago, Prepared, a Manual for Surviving Worst Case Scenarios by Mike Glover. Action is just move. Get moving. Get off the X. Doing something is better than doing nothing, usually. The opposite corollary is knowing when not to act. Rockefeller had that trick. This section is on action. Rockefeller's not really discussed in there, but what he put in on regarding Rockefeller in part 1 also pertains to part 2, because he also knew when not to act, when not to buy stocks. Know when to take the risk, even if it's not flattering. The example he provides here is Amelia Earhart, who, for her first transatlantic flight, was told basically, quote, "We have someone willing to fund the first female transatlantic flight. Our first choice backed out. You won't get to fly the plane. We're going to send 2 men along as chaperones, and we're going to pay them, but not you. We just want to see if women can, in fact, safely cross the Atlantic in a plane." And she took this insane offer, however degrading it was. Why? Because you have to start somewhere. All right? If you wait for the absolute ideal, pristine, perfect conditions, you're never going to do anything. You're just going to sit there waiting for life to hand you something when you should be taking action. You have to start somewhere. Persistence is key to action. And here Holliday talks about General Ulysses S. Grant and his attack on Vicksburg during the Civil War. When no other attacks worked, he was forced to think outside the box, move up the river, leave all supplies behind, and live off the land. Now, again, this doesn't make you friends, certainly. I mean, it's not like the South was ever going to love him anyways, given the circumstances, but he didn't care. His goal wasn't to make friends with the South. It wasn't to bring the South back into the fold. It was to win a war. So that's what he did. They ransacked towns, which flew in the face of conventional warfare at the time, which was, leave the civilians alone. But he ensured that he was eventually able to lay siege to Vicksburg and turn the war solidly in favor of the North. Use obstacles against themselves by knowing when not to act, like Gandhi. Civil disobedience exposed the horrors of British colonialism to the world. If he had actually fought back, if he had done movement and fought back, then the world would have just been like, oh, it's just a rebellion the British are putting down, no big deal. But by staying calm and civil and not acting, it exposed the horrors of colonialism to the world. Martin Luther King Jr. did the exact same thing with the brutality of Jim Crow laws in the southern states. Exposed the horror of it to the world, and the world reacted in sympathy to the cause. So know when not to act. And while you can control your perceptions and direct your actions, you have to be prepared for the idea that none of it may work. The world around us may not be cooperative with what we want to achieve. I mean, nothing can stop you from trying, but sometimes obstacles truly can't be overcome. And you can practice all the possible scenarios in your head. You know, what about a fire that might burn down my business? Well, I can always buy business insurance, and that will help cover me and mitigate that risk, right? Things like that. But then there's something that no one ever thought of happening will come at you out of left field, like a pandemic, for example, which wiped out thousands of small businesses. And there was no real way to prepare for that from a business perspective. Be big enough that it's not going to impact you like Walmart, Amazon, Google, right? But the small businesses, there's no insurance policy against pandemic shutting down your business. Now, the section on action includes discipline of action, get moving, practice persistence, iteration, follow the process, do your job right. What's right is what works. In praise of a flank attack, use obstacles against themselves, channel your energy, seize the offensive, and prepare for none of it to work, because sometimes you just have to accept fate. Now, that actually comes in the part on willpower, is acceptance of fate. And that is the last section, willpower, or as Holiday puts it, quote, true will is quiet humility, resilience, and flexibility. The other kind of will is weakness disguised by ambition. See which lasts longer under the hardest of obstacles. Willpower is Theodore Roosevelt exercising every day for 3 years until he overcame asthma and the physical weakness of the body he was born with. And he truly was born the 90-pound weakling, if you will. And then his father came in and basically set up a gym at the house and said, son, you will always be this physically weak, unable to do anything unless you start exercising your body. And Roosevelt did it. Exercised every day for 3 years until basically he beat asthma, which you wouldn't have thought was possible, but he freaking did it, beat asthma. Will is knowing when an obstacle truly can't be overcome and learning how to go with the flow, like Helen Keller. You know, acquiescing to the fact of her disabilities, yet still becoming world famous as an author and disability rights activist. There's no overcoming blindness and deafness, but you can learn to live with what has happened to you and go with the flow of that. And that is what she did. It's acquiescing is Thomas Jefferson realizing that he would never be a great orator. He didn't like public speaking, and rather than trying to force himself to do that, he poured all of his passions into writing, which enabled him to write the Declaration of Independence in a single draft. Acquiescing is knowing that man proposes, God disposes. You can't control all things, except when something can't be controlled, and move on. Willpower is perseverance. Not quite the same thing as persistence. Persistence is an action. Perseverance is the long game. It's knowing success is not going to be overnight, or maybe not even in 5 years or 10 years, but continuing anyway. Holiday clarifies it as, quote, persistence is attempting to solve some difficult problem with dogged determination and hammering until a break occurs. Perseverance is what happens not just in one round, but in 2 rounds and every round after that, and then the fight after that and the fight after that until the very end. That's perseverance. That's will to overcome every obstacle. Persistence is action. Perseverance is a matter of willpower. One is energy, the other is endurance. The section on will includes subsections on discipline of will, build your own inner citadel, anticipation, art of acquiescence, love everything that happens to you, amor fati. Accept some whims of fate, but know which ones you can push back against. Perseverance, something bigger than yourself, meditate on your mortality and prepare to start again. Stoicism, it always provides food for thought and good things to meditate on. It's understandable why Stoicism remains an enduring philosophy on which to build your personal kingdom. It easily describes the thoughts of the most resilient among us. Stoicism is accepting that ultimately you are responsible for your own fate. Nobody else is responsible, you are. Accept it, along with the fact of your own mortality. Holiday has a very definite way with words. I feel like this is the first book of his I've read. Is it? I think it is. And he gets his point across without belaboring it, which made this book a joy to read. And one that I'll probably keep out. I'm not sure. I may actually just put it on my nightstand and like pick a virtue to meditate on, basically. And I'll reflect back on it frequently. Kind of a reflection as I continue with this next phase of learning, moving into religion, right? I do recommend it for anybody who is trying to get a handle on the insanity of the modern world and come out the other side more in control of yourself and your life. This is a very good place to start. I mean, so is Seneca, so is Marcus Aurelius, so is Epictetus, but this is kind of a condensed version of the things that people have learned from reading those. And that's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Bye.